Hey, good morning, Eastern Oregon, and welcome to this August 6th version of AM Live on EOA, your connection to Eastern Oregon, and we're on the EOA network. And here in just a bit, we're going to have our guest, Union County Prosecutor Kelsie McDaniel will be with us for the first time on this show. She's been with us before a few years ago, but yeah, that'll be great interview. So, how are you, man?
Second Monday.
Are you feeling it?
Well, so this weekend, Saturday, was my first day off in 17 days.
Yeah.
Because of Shrine.
Right.
And I did nothing.
Did that feel good? Yeah. So what'd you do on Sunday, though?
About the same thing.
About the same.
I left the house at least on
Yeah.
Sunday, but yeah, just recover.
Yeah.
Like try to, relaxed.
Yeah.
A lot of just watching YouTube videos, Olympics. I watched a lot of Olympics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your what sport do you really like to watch in the Olympics?
I like volleyball.
Yeah.
Either or, like
Yeah.
men's, women's. I like basketball, of course.
Who
I don't
ended-
like 3-on-3 basketball. I think that's dumb.
Who ended up winning the gold in volleyball?
I don't think it's done yet.
Is it still going?
I know wrestling is today. Basketball's not done yet. I think volleyball goes through a few more days.
Okay.
The men's basketball team they're in the quarterfinals. I think they play today. I like this Australian sprinter too named Bree Masters. She's probably my favorite track and field athlete outside of the Americans. She used to be a beach sprinter turned regular sprinter, and she's the first Australian woman to qualify for the semifinals. She didn't make it past that since 2000 though. So it's just a good story, you know what I mean? She used to run on beaches, which is really popular in Australia, not so popular here. And now she's an Olympic sprinter.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Running on beaches would be a good workout.
Oh yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. There was a armed robbery last night, BC, at the mobile station here in town. Like at 9:30 a.m., a white male armed with a revolver-style handgun. He pointed the firearm at the cashier. I got handed over about $100. He took off in a Dodge Caravan minivan, and then he was wearing black tennis shoes, black shorts, a red and black flannel button-up shirt, and a black baseball hat. If you have any information, please call LGPD 541-963-1017. Bold.
Which one's the mobile station? Is that the one right downtown here on Adams?
No, that's Chevron. I think the mobile is the one back here where Burger King used to be.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I know the one down, like right here in the middle of town by the local Chevron.
There are so many questions with that. A minivan, $100.
Yeah, $100.
Armed robbery.
You probably assumed there was more than that. And you know what's crazy is like you'd figure in a LeGrand, like usually most of the crimes like that are not person to person because most people are smart enough to know that dang near everybody around here has a gun and you're probably going to get shot back at.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? So you don't see a lot of like home invasions with guns because people, I mean, they're criminals are dumb, but they ain't that dumb.
Well, yeah. I mean, the only time you do see that, and Kelsie can talk about it, is when people are high or not in their right mind normally in some manner, or they break into the
very
wrong house,
rarely happens around here
Yeah.
compared to like other places. Like you see more like people breaking into cars because you don't have the chance of getting shot per se.
Well, and the disguise was
a COVID mask.
a COVID mask. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
I don't
wild,
know.
man.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, and I would say the same thing. Like, just give them the money. Like, it's all insured. Like, the cashier, you know what I mean? You don't ever want to try to fight
Right, but
back
there's a
or
lot of
anything.
that. There's a lot of that story that like points to like really desperation. I mean, you got a minivan, you got a family, or I don't know.
Or it's stolen.
Right, I guess that.
I
Yeah.
doubt the guy was trying to take care of a family. You know
Right,
what I mean?
yeah.
It was probably stolen or borrowed or just happened to have a minivan, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe.
Here we are playing detective, right?
Yeah. Good done.
So, yeah. Well,
Wild. Just doesn't happen very often around here.
thankfully, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that is the kind of thing that people can really get harmed doing, either one way or the other. So,
Yeah.
well, hey, you want to do sports?
Let's do it.
All right.
AM Sports Report brought to you by Hobby Habit right here in town. Look at this awesome collection of Legos they have in. From Kendamas to Frisbee Golf and from Magic Cars to Traxxas RC Cars, Hobby Habit has everything for your hobby needs. 411 First Street in LeGrand, Hobby Habit, just for the fun of it. Go check them out. Last week we talked about the fall schedule for LHS sports, so now we're just going to talk about the opening season games for EOU athletics. EOU volleyball gets their season underway on Friday the 16th on the road in Caldwell against Arizona Christian University. This game starts at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. EOU women's soccer takes on Spokane Falls that same day right here at Community Stadium at 11 a.m. EOU men's soccer kicks off their 24-25 campaign with a home game versus Northern Idaho College on August 18th at 11:30 a.m. And then finally, EOU football will start their season at home as well on the 31st versus Pacific Northwest Christian College. 1 o'clock start, Community Stadium. It's pretty exciting. There's a whole bunch of games in August for soccer and volleyball. Those are just the first games of the year. I'm pumped. I'm ready. I wonder where volleyball is going. I'm going to guess volleyball will start the season 5th, ranked 5th in the country. That's my prediction. The polls haven't came out yet, but I'm going to go ahead and say we start number 5 in the country. Women's soccer might break into the top 25 in the first poll. Men's soccer and football will not be in the top 25 at all. Well, hopefully eventually, but to start the season.
Right.
As of now, we'll be televising the LeGrand High School football and Baker High School football home games with a possibility of doing Pendleton as well, we're hoping. And so that means all the games that are played in Baker by Baker and all the games that are played in LeGrand by LeGrand will be right here on the EO Live Network. Should be a good year. It's exciting. Fall is my problem. I like them all, but when fall starts getting going, I get excited because it's back into the grind and the whole sports. It kind of dies down towards the end of summer, and I'm ready. I'm definitely ready. The McKinley family, Cade's Courage. There's a QR code on the screen. It'll take you directly to the GoFundMe page for the McKinley family. Cade is going to be a sophomore at LeGrand High School. He's battling a rare form of Ewing sarcoma. He's an athlete. The family, Coach McKinley and his wife, they've done a lot for this community, and they're going to need some help battling this down the road. And so they've set this GoFundMe up. You can also go to U.S. Bank here in LeGrand if you don't want to use GoFundMe, and just tell them that you want to donate to the McKinley family or Cade's Courage. And it's an awesome thing. I love to see community come together on stuff like this. AM Sports Report brought to you by Hobby Habit right here in LeGrand, just for the fun of it.
All right. Good stuff. Thank you. So I was going to ask you, what did you think of that photo finish? That guy winning by 1/5,000th of a second.
Yeah. 500ths of a second.
1/500th?
Yeah, 500ths of a second. Yeah.
Okay.
But he leaned right. The guy from Jamaica, they said if the guy from Jamaica leans instead of kind of comes back, because the guy from Jamaica's foot crossed the line way before Noah Lyles did.
Right.
But it's torso. In track and field, it's your torso, any part of your torso. And if the guy from Jamaica would have just leaned forward, Noah Lyles don't win that gold.
Yeah. I saw a graph. I mean, it's all over social media, of course. I saw a graph of the guy who did win.
Noah Lyles,
yeah.
American.
The way he changed places over the course of a...
Yeah, he was in 7th.
Yeah. And so just...
But he's a late he's a late runner.
Is he?
Yeah, that's what it's called. He's a finisher. There's some guys that he had the 7th best start. Yeah, but he's just He's phenomenal. I mean, he was the world champ in the 100 and the 200. I don't think he won the 200, but he won the 100.
Right. That's no, crazy.
Yeah. And the funny thing is one of the guys in the world championships looked back at him and beat him. I think it was either this year or last year. And Noah Lyles said, "I'll see you in Paris," and ended up beating him in Paris. So, which is nothing more important than the Olympics.
Yeah. If you're gonna peak, that's where you want to peak, right?
Definitely, for sure. It's crazy. They talk about like the Olympic Village, and when you're an athlete, once your events are over, they make you leave. You don't get to stay in the village, because they don't want you distracting the people that are still.
Right, yeah.
So a lot of them, if they don't make plans, they come home and then go back for the closing ceremonies.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because there's some countries where they don't have their Olympic qualifiers until 2 weeks before the Olympics. Mm-hmm. I think Canada's one of them, and so by the time they qualify, they can't book anything in Paris because it's completely packed. And they can't stay at the Olympic Village, so they got to come home and then fly back.
Huh.
It's wild, yeah.
Yeah.
But that Snoop Dogg's been a fixture at the. You know how much he's making to do that? How much do you think he's making, BC?
I don't know. I was trying to figure out what is he doing.
He's like the mascot of the Olympics for the USA.
Really?
He makes $500,000 a day plus all of his expenses.
I don't. Yeah.
To go and cheer for the USA at the Olympics. What a job, man.
So he's a mascot for the American Olympics?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I know, for the Americans at the, I mean, because he's,
yeah, basically. I mean, you don't call him that, but he's a fanboy for the USA. And all the memes are so funny. It says, "Yeah, my mom says she loves watching Snoop Dogg at the Olympics, but she forgot that she took his CD away from me when I was 13 years old."
Well, and I guess, yeah. So in Flavor Flav, I saw he's
gonna pay for the U.S. women's polo team for the next 4 years. He's going to pay for all their expenses. And it's because he has a daughter who's an athlete, and he's all about supporting women's sports. Huh. Pretty cool.
Well, good for them in their image recreation, I guess.
JD says, "Buy me a haircut. He's going to start scaring kids soon." I can't. Come on, JD. I got a bet going.
Yeah. Well,
trust me, I hate it too. Don't get me wrong. I hate having hair touch my ears. All right. The longest it's ever been too.
Is it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, by far.
All right. Well, hey, we're gonna take a break, and we will be back with Union County Prosecutor Kelsie McDaniel here in just a minute. Welcome to Creating Memories for Disabled Children at beautiful Wallowa Lake, Oregon. Over the years, we have offered families of children with disabilities a free vacation at our beautiful camp properties. These getaways are a respite for families who often deal with an increased amount of emotional stress, financial hardships, and isolation. At Creating Memories, these families are able to relax in the knowledge that their child is loved and that their efforts are seen. Since 2018, we have completed a cabin renovation every 2 years, continually increasing our capacity to serve. We have fully renovated 3 cabins to become fully accessible lodging for families, including full kitchens and wheelchair-accessible bathrooms. We now turn our focus to the lodge building at the Creating Memories camp. Our vision for the Lodge includes gatherings, networking, education, connections, community, and fellowship. We want it to be a place for families to share their struggles and joys, their needs and their knowledge, their setbacks and their celebrations. We are creating memories for disabled children, and our mission is to do just that. Alrighty, and we are back with Union County District Attorney Kelsie McDaniel, not District Prosecutor. What did I say? Prosecuting Attorney?
No, you said prosecutor twice.
I said prosecutor.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so what's the difference between? Is there a difference between a county district attorney and a county prosecutor?
They're just called different things
Yeah.
from state to state. Like
Yeah.
in Washington, it's the prosecuting attorney. In
Okay.
Oregon, they're district attorneys.
Yeah.
We are all prosecutors, but
Yeah.
they're just called different things in different states.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I don't know that I've ever said your title before because I know you personally. We've connected a number of times. You're just Kelsie to me.
That's fine.
Yeah, so no, I'm glad you're here with us, and what a cool opportunity for. And we've talked. You and Kyle have been talking for a while about getting on the show, and things are a little settled down compared to what they were just a few months ago, with the whole election process and stuff. And so, maybe this is a better time to be on. Who knows?
Just depends.
Yeah. So I guess start with telling it. What do you do? What does a district attorney do?
A lot of things.
And who's your boss? Let's deal with those two things. Yeah.
Okay. Who's my boss? The people.
Okay.
A lot of people think that the elected district attorneys report to the attorney general, but we don't. We're all autonomously elected within the state. So I'm technically a state employee, but my boss is really the citizens, the people of Union County.
Okay.
And then what I do is different every single day. Obviously, we prosecute crimes, but we also do a lot of things that people don't realize we do. We run the medical examiner program. We do civil commitment work. I write all the ballot titles for the county when people have citizen initiatives. We do some county council work. It's a huge myriad of what we do. Mm-hmm. We provide law enforcement with legal questions and expertise. I always joke that if you see a police officer on the side of the road talking on his phone, he's probably talking to myself or one of the deputies, asking for advice or assistance with something. But then I also think sometimes the legislature has something they want to do and they think, well, who should we give this to? And then they just throw it at the DAs.
It's like, let's have them do it.
Yeah, like I do public records request appeals.
Yeah.
Just something completely outside of prosecution work, but there's a couple of things like that the job also entails.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about why would a police officer want to talk to you in the middle of a stop or whatever? I mean, talk to and kind of from that talk to us about the chain of when somebody breaks the law. How does that go clear to, the different steps that they go through? Like, if they really did commit the crime, the thing that they go through clear to being punished in some manner. Yeah.
Those are two pretty big questions.
Yeah.
To answer the first one about law enforcement officers talking to us, you have what are the statutes, right? The laws, things that if you do are considered a crime in the state of Oregon, and that's controlling law. But then you also have what we refer to as case law, when people appeal things and the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court make rules about those laws. And that changes all the time.
Okay.
And so that you can look at what a law says, but then there's going to be a lot of other things that go into interpreting what that law says. So most of the time, it's law enforcement calling us and asking us about those nuances.
Okay, so give me an example of how case law affects a law that has been passed by Oregon.
Okay, so in terms of like traffic stops
okay,
or
go
things
ahead,
like
yeah.
that, we used to have something called the unavoidable lull, where a law enforcement officer, when they're talking to somebody, notices something's up, right? They can see something looks like, and I'll just use the vernacular of, it looks sketchy to them, right? They used to be able to take that time to then run the person's criminal history. And in that time period, we called that the unavoidable lull, where then they could ask other questions. Where are you coming from? You know, have you ever been in trouble? Do you got any drugs in there? Do you have any guns in there? That kind of stuff. The case law took that away.
Okay.
And now you can't have the unavoidable lull, and you're not allowed to ask those questions unless you have reasonable suspicion off the bat. Meaning that what you're observing is enough to amount to reasonable suspicion, and then that opens the door.
Okay.
But that would be an example of something where a police officer might have questions about, do I have enough for reasonable suspicion? Do I need to write a search warrant at this point? We review all the search warrants and help write them sometimes. So they would tell us, you know, hey, we're going to have a search warrant coming. And we do those at all hours and a lot of times on holidays, honestly.
Because the point of all of that, the reason that's all important is that if somebody genuinely is breaking the law and they need to be pulled out of society for the well-being of other folks in some manner, that if that officer doesn't do things exactly correctly, let's say that they
Right. If you
they
instead
exercise the unavoidable law
Right.
rather than looking, okay, then that gives that defense attorney, or that's the opportunity to have that whole thing thrown out at some point. Is that right?
correct, or at the very least that evidence. So if
Okay.
now instead of using that unavoidable lull, if you can't articulate that reasonable suspicion and the officer just jumped into, hey, this is why I pulled you over. Do you have any guns and drugs in there?
Yeah.
If the defendant says, yeah, I do. Here's my bazooka and my pound of meth.
Right.
We can't prosecute that.
Right. Or let's say that in the search you find a murder weapon.
Exactly. You
Okay.
never know what is going
And
to
so
be
you
coming
find-
through
yeah,
I-84.
and yeah, you find a murder weapon, and all of a sudden, that critical piece of evidence has been thrown out
Right.
for some reason.
So, I mean, that's a big example. There's
Right,
been a
right.
ton of search
Right.
and seizure issues that have changed, and to be honest, make it more difficult for law enforcement to do their job and for me to then prove a case.
Yeah.
Because I can only work with what the product is that I receive in terms of what the investigation is, and
Right.
they've definitely put more hamstring challenges for law enforcement in that, but we work together to try to figure that out. We train together, and then we're always available to answer questions. Like, you know, I was taking a phone call right before we came on.
Right. No. Okay. So now go ahead and kind of lead us through the chain of what happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if someone calls for service, if you will, depending on where it is in the county, a different law enforcement agency will respond. We have 3 in this county. So you have OSP, the Sheriff's Office, and LaGrande Police Department. They all have jurisdictions per se of, you know, where they tend to stick around, but they all work together and support each other, especially depending on what time it is and what the shift looks like. If they respond to service and make either an arrest or an arrest and a citation, that information comes to my office, and then we handle it differently based on if the person is in custody, in jail still, or if they are released from jail and then they come for a citation on Tuesdays, usually when we do those arraignments. So then my office does 2 things primarily. We review the information to determine what charges are appropriate, and then we also provide victim services if there's a victim involved. There's actually a constitutional right to victim services, which is pretty cool in Oregon. Not all states have that. But we would make that evaluation, and then we would arraign the person if they're in custody or out.
Okay. So let's go back. So the arraignment is what?
The arraignment's what you see on Law and Order.
Right, I know, but what is that? I mean, because that word is kind of scary.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, depending on where. I mean, that's just the first step of like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's advising the person of what they're accused of. So
Okay.
making sure that their name is correctly spelled so that we
Okay.
have the appropriate person, that
Okay.
the person that is being accused of doing something is the actual person
Okay.
who is before them. then you also are advising them, these are the crimes that you're accused of. These are the maximum penalties. This is what you could potentially be facing.
Okay.
And then your rights in terms of your ability to retain an attorney or one being provided for you. Something kind of interesting that I don't think people know is that even if the state provides you an attorney, like if you apply and say, I'm quote unquote indigent or I don't have the means to hire on my own, they will still assess you based on your ability to pay, and you might have to pay back the state for your court-appointed attorney.
Oh,
So
okay.
when people say like you have a right to an attorney, if you can't afford one, one will be provided for you.
Yeah.
They also don't say, and you might have to pay some of that back if you
Yeah.
can afford $200, not $2,000. The
Right.
state's going to make you pay that back.
Okay.
But that's what an arraignment basically is, and then to give you your rights in terms of this is what the next process is going to be, this is what you can expect. Hopefully you get to meet your attorney. And sometimes up front people will resolve their cases at arraignment, but most of the time that's the kind of kickoff in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
If they're charged with a felony, it then goes to grand jury or preliminary hearing, and then we have another arraignment. And the reason for that is the charges could change. The grand jury actually ultimately indicts felonies, not the DA, not the victim.
So what does the grand jury do? Describe that process.
The grand jury reviews all felony cases in Oregon if they don't go to preliminary hearing. And not all states have grand jury. It's basically people that got either really unlucky or lucky, depending on how you look at it, in terms
Citizens?
of...
Yeah.
Yes. So you get jury duty. So not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but if you get picked for jury duty, it means a computer in Salem picked your name.
Okay.
If you get picked for grand jury, that means that that same computer picked your name twice. So, and it also selects who the presiding juror is and the alternate presiding juror, and that means that computer picked you 3 times.
Oh, man.
So you either need to buy a lottery ticket that day or stay at home and hide, depending on how you look at it. But basically, every felony that goes through the system has to be heard by a grand jury. A citizen group has to determine that when all the evidence is presented, taken together, that is sufficient to move forward to the next step. It's a threshold determination. It's not guilty or innocent.
Right.
It means if you only heard one side of the story,
Right.
the prosecution, is there enough evidence to convict?
Right.
If you didn't have an explanation, if you didn't have a defense, is there enough evidence to show that this crime has been committed?
Okay.
And then you go back into the circuit court system or process rather, and the case proceeds. If it doesn't, like for some reason, this is a really bad example, but if we presented a case that was, this is possession of methamphetamine, which isn't a felony anymore, but if it were, and the grand jury said, no, we think that that's cocaine, they could not true bill it, and that case would be closed and put away, and we would not be able to prosecute it beyond that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just like identifying the drug wrong gets a case thrown out.
No, I mean, that would be if they not true billed it. What the process does actually is that they would come to us and say, we don't think this is meth, we think it's cocaine. We would change the indictment and give it to them.
Okay.
I use it as just an example in
Right.
terms of if the grand jury determined that no crime had occurred,
Right.
then it would be closed. It's not public record, and it can't be reopened without a judge's permission.
Wow.
So then the part of your job on non-felonies or whatever, part of your job is if there is a crime to help build the evidence, help the officer or whomever is gather that information, the evidence so that you can prosecute in some manner. That's part of what you do.
Yeah, usually I explain it as like there's a difference between solving a crime and building a case.
Okay.
So you may be able to say, and sometimes victims can tell you, like, this is who stole from me, or this is what happened here. So what I know and what I can prove might be 2 different things.
Right.
So we try to work with law enforcement to build, not just solve the crime, but to build the case so that we can actually go into court and prove it
Right.
In front of a jury.
But what I was getting at is that the grand jury is doing part of that. They're the citizen part
For sure.
of doing that, saying, yes,
sure.
we think in our opinion, there's enough evidence here, and that's secret. Although that grand jury finding is kept. I mean, it's not public, right?
It's not public. It is recorded and available to the defendant.
Okay.
But it's not public record. Like the newspaper can't go get a copy of that recording.
Right. Okay.
To that extent. But it is secret if there's a not true bill. If they determine that there's not sufficient evidence, then that's sealed.
Okay. So then go on from there. So then let's say the grand jury says, yes, we think there's enough evidence to prosecute this case.
Correct.
Then?
Then you have another arraignment.
Okay.
And that's because the evidence might have changed. The charges may have changed. We present to the grand jury, these are the charges that we would ask that you consider or that you may consider, but they may say, we don't feel comfortable with count number 2, we don't think there's enough evidence on that, or they might say, there was a kid there. We would like a charge that reflects that there's a kid there.
Right.
So we would make an indictment that matches what they have requested, and they ultimately make the decision.
And things can be added also.
Added,
Okay.
changed, taken out.
Okay.
It's something that I bring up a lot for victims because I always see people talk about a victim wanting to quote unquote press charges.
Right.
And that's not really a thing. I mean, victims, obviously, we listen to them and we care about what they think, but the grand jury, I've had victims come into grand jury and say, I don't want to prosecute, especially like in domestic violence cases,
Yeah.
and say, I don't want anything bad to happen to this person. And the grand jury says, well, the evidence is here. This is the crimes that he committed. It's not a situation in which the victim has that authority over that legal process there,
Right.
which sometimes can be a real benefit.
Right.
Because that victim can then say, I told them I didn't want anything to happen to you. I told them I don't want to prosecute. And they're protected from...
Yeah, it takes the burden off the victim.
Exactly. It takes that
100%.
responsibility off of them in that regard. And sometimes that's a real protection.
Yeah. Okay, and so there are times, and backing up just a little bit, there are times, it seems like there was a couple of years ago, there was a drive-by shooting, and one of the initial arrests was reckless driving. And on social media it was like, what, no charge for the gun, no charge for the, and then some of those other charges came after the fact. And is that a case of, did that happen before the grand jury or after the grand jury? I mean, is that kind of an example of how things can change once they go through the process a little bit?
Well, generally speaking, like let's say you have a scenario where there's an incident like that during the night, right? You're dealing with officers that are working the night shift.
Right.
They have to get some of their reports done if they're putting that person into custody. Mm-hmm. They have to have what's called the probable cause statement filed with the jail, the court, and my office by the time that we can actually review it. Mm-hmm. So if you think about like the practical nature of that, if you have an ongoing developing situation, especially something that spanned a large area of our county, might have multiple victims, might have multiple people involved. Basically, when I come into the office, if I'm not already on scene from the night before, I review those probable cause statements around 9:30 a.m., which means they have to have those things done because I have to have charges filed by 11 a.m. because that person has to be arraigned by 1:15 p.m. that day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you have these really tight timelines, and so sometimes you might not have recovered a firearm until after the probable cause statement has already been submitted at 9:30. That officer at some point might need to take...
Between arrest and having to be arraigned, what is that limit?
Well, we do it every day at 1:15.
Oh, I see. Okay,
so
got it.
If you get arrested the day before, unless the court is closed, we do it at 1:15.
Okay.
And our charges have to be submitted to the court by 11 a.m.
Got it.
What's the law around that, though? Like, how long can you let somebody sit before they're arraigned?
Well, 36 hours, but we don't do that.
Yeah, but you could if you had to. Well, it's to cover the weekends, right? Like, because
Right.
you might get arrested on Friday night and you can't see a judge till Monday.
Right, and there is an exception for good cause, which would be like 3-day weekends, right? So if you get arrested on Friday,
And
you see
Monday's
those
a
memes
holiday.
on Facebook
Yeah.
too, right? Don't get arrested on Friday on a 3-day weekend because
Right.
the judge isn't coming in until Tuesday.
It's going to be a long weekend.
It's a
Right.
long weekend.
Right, right. So you do have those timelines, but in terms of practicality and like what we actually do in the process and the workflow,
Right.
a lot of times information will come in after that initial report has been completed, the initial review of charges has been made, and the initial arraignment has occurred.
Right.
So basically, the initial report is to just get it in the system and get it moving. Kinda.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, that's such a lawyer answer, but
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I mean, I expected a few of those.
Right? But that's essentially how some of those things happen. And you might have more than one officer working on the same case. They may not be submitting their reports at the same timeline. You've got your first initial one, which, that priority is going to be, if it is a dangerous situation, holding that person in custody and making sure that the public is safe. And then slowing down and making sure that we haven't just solved the crime, this is our person, but we're also building that case with all of the other moving pieces, interviews, collection of evidence, things like that.
Because, so Kyle, my son-in-law, is a deputy, and I've heard him talk about how at the end of a long day or at the end of a long night, then if something happens at the very end of the night, it means that there's a ton of paperwork that's have to be done before he even goes home.
For sure.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like somebody going in and ordering a burger at McDonald's at 11:59 when they close at
Right.
12.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
only.
rude.
Only.
Like, don't be committing crimes right before these guys
Yeah.
get
Only
on.
there
Dang
could be
it.
3 or 4 hours
Right.
of stuff that has to be
Right.
done. Yeah. So and you mentioned earlier, when you talked about the 3 of them work together, the 3 agencies will work together.
Correct.
And you said depending on how the shifts are, that there might be times where one of the officers from one of the agencies might be at the very end of the shift, and so maybe I'm just guessing.
Well,
So
I
they
think-
might hand some of that stuff off to someone who is in the middle of their.
No, it's not really a handoff thing. It's more of like, let's say you have a deputy in Elgin who's dealing with, a citizen complaint of some sort, but you
Okay.
get a LeGrand PD gets a call for a priority,
Okay.
like a domestic violence or something like that. If OSP is closer, they're going to be listening to that. And in my experience, they usually offer, hey, I'm closer. I'm going to do the initial. You can come and be my backup, that
Got
kind
it.
of thing.
Okay.
Not really like coverage wise,
Right.
more of just supporting one another and trying to make sure that priority calls are taken and that everything is appropriately staffed.
Right. And something that a lot of people might not understand is that OSP, they have a lot deeper pockets than anybody else. I mean they're the ones that have the major crime lab in the state. So I don't know, you fill in the blanks here you tell me.
Well, the biggest difference is that OSP is funded by the state.
right.
The county is funded by
Right.
the
No,
county.
no.
The city
I
is
got
funded
deeper
by the
pockets.
city.
Right. But so then that is one of the reasons if you have some kind of a major crime and let's say it involves forensics or that type of thing, OSP being there is a very critical thing. And they're the ones that might say, bringing in a special unit to gather evidence. I don't know. I'm filling the blanks here. Is this true? I don't know.
Kind of. We have what's called a major crimes team,
Okay.
and that is a collective of all of the agencies, including my office.
Okay.
And so if there's an offense or a crime that occurs that rises to that level, then we need those resources. We will call what we call activating the major crimes team. Usually it's a collective decision, and the jurisdiction really dictates who the lead person is. So if it's in the county is going to take the lead unless there's an issue where we would collectively decide that maybe a different agency would be appropriate. The Oregon State Police Crime Lab and their mobile response team for their forensic lab is available to any of the jurisdictions, and we usually call them out collectively as a decision that we make as major crimes.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to the scenario of, so the grand jury finds enough evidence. You have another arraignment. Okay. And so then what happens after that?
So then usually that's kind of like where I say then the lawyers duke it out.
Okay.
We'll negotiate to determine whether or not there's a resolution short of trial. We'll consider whether or not a specialty court is appropriate for the person, meaning behavioral health court, which is primarily for people suffering from mental health issues or veterans, or our treatment court, which is drugs and alcohol. If that's an appropriate resolution, if Department of Corrections prison time is appropriate, we'll negotiate those things. That's also the time where we would file motions. So motions to suppress, where you're talking about the murder weapon in the trunk, if you will.
Yeah.
Things like that to chip away at evidence or to bolster our evidence. And then after that, we would have a trial.
Okay. And that's what we all, I think we're fairly familiar with what happens there. Okay, so let's talk about plea deals.
Okay.
And because that moves work along, but it sometimes can be controversial. So I mean,
For sure.
So talk to me about that. How does that? Are there cases where it's like, well, we went for a plea deal? I don't know. Just kind of generally deal with that. Yeah, talk about that.
Most cases resolve through plea negotiations.
Okay.
And that's in every criminal jurisdiction in America.
Okay.
That's statistically a fact. A lot of times, and what we say is that our office's goal is to seek justice, and that looks different to every single case.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, we have a constitutional amendment that allows for victims' rights. Victims are included in those plea negotiations. Their opinions are included in those plea negotiations. They have the ability to speak at arraignments. They have an ability to speak at any pivotal point in time, and that includes negotiations. So we try really hard to remain consistent with victims' wishes in that. Sometimes what victims want isn't necessarily legal, but we try really hard to alleviate whatever it is that they're looking for in it. The most challenging thing I think about plea negotiations is that when you're dealing with a victim, something horrible has happened to them.
Right.
Whether it's somebody damaging your mailbox or a sexual assault. It hits different people differently in terms of the effect it has on them.
Absolutely.
And the criminal justice system is the only avenue there where the outlet is there, right? That's how they're supposed to, quote unquote, deal with what it is that happened to them. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't make anybody whole. It doesn't fix the hurt, if you will. And that's the really frustrating thing. Like, I can put somebody in jail, but is it going to make you feel better? Is it going to make you feel safer? Might be yes, might be no. And so the challenges and the nuances, and I think that's where the controversy comes from too. Sometimes people get upset about when they read about how a case might resolve. I usually ask them, well, what would you do? What do you think should happen?
Yeah.
Nobody really knows.
Right.
So that's really a challenge in terms of the nuances of the criminal justice system. It doesn't fix things, and that's probably my least favorite thing about the job is that I can't always get the outcome that someone might expect or want in their case, and that's the most frustrating thing about my job.
So let me drill down on that
Yeah.
a little bit. So let's say that there's a crime. It's kind of come to the point where you could go to trial, mm-hmm. but from a prosecutor or from a district attorney, you know that there might be an element of evidence that is not as strong as what it could be, and the county would lose.
Yeah, so the issue is whether or not it would be considered reasonable doubt.
Okay, right. And so in that particular case, so then if you can take that case, I mean, let's say you're talking to a victim, okay, in that particular case, and you're laying this out for them, and I would imagine you probably, and you say, okay, yeah, we could take this to trial, but that person might walk scot-free because of this particular thing. But if we encourage them to do a plea deal, at least there is some justice. I mean, is that a real scenario?
Yeah.
Am I describing some of the things that you weigh every day?
Absolutely, and we'll have sit-down meetings to discuss that.
Yeah.
The difference really is there's an ethical issue that comes in if I'm assessing the case as it's getting ready to go to trial. If there is a reasonable doubt,
Right.
there's an ethical issue as to whether or not I should go forward with that case.
If you should prosecute it,
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So there's a difference between let's roll the dice because we have a good case, but we don't know what a jury's going to do.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You have that bird in the hand discussion, but it changes if I believe there's reasonable doubt.
Okay.
Or my office assesses there's reasonable doubt. And sometimes the officer will tell me that. Like,
Right.
I don't know about this, primarily because during that kind of, when I said duke it out with the attorneys, sometimes we get what's called reciprocal discovery. So a defense investigator or the defendant or the defense attorney will give us something that's exculpatory, that makes it less likely that the defendant may have committed the crime, or mitigates their involvement in some way. So we assess, does that rise to the level of reasonable doubt? Because then you have that ethical issue. That's a different discussion than should we roll the dice and see what a jury thinks, or bird in the hand, this is what we think we can get in terms of negotiations.
So talk to me for a minute.
It's weird, I know.
No, this is super interesting.
It makes sense, though.
Yeah, it is
100%.
super interesting. So, but what happens, I mean, in Union County, you know all of the law enforcement folks. I mean, you have relationships with them. You guys bump into each other all the time. I'm sure that there are times, though, that they are super passionate because they were on the very front end of that crime, whatever that might be. They really want justice. They really want to see that person, receive what it is that they deserve. But you're on the side of but there's not enough evidence. I don't talk to me about that dynamic of when there's, everybody knows that person did that crime, but there's not enough evidence to really, take it
Those
to
are
trial.
the worst.
They are, yeah, I would imagine so.
So that really comes down to communication.
Yeah.
So in making sure that the officer is communicating to me about what their feelings and thoughts are about the case, but then it also goes back to the difference between solving a crime and building a case, right? So that communication is going to include the discussions of, is there anything else we could do? Is there any other investigative avenue that we haven't taken yet?
Okay.
Anything else we can do to shore this case up? And there are some situations where we can't, but a lot of times there might be something else that we haven't thought of that we should continue to try to do. So we try to work with law enforcement to make sure that we can get the best possible package to present to a jury to be successful in that situation. That's really the difference between what I know and what I can prove.
Right.
And usually those conversations are really productive in terms of, okay, this is my problem. I have a issue of A, B, and C. And the officer might say, oh, shoot, I do know about that. Or I can go interview these other people. Or I can follow up and do this. Is there a search warrant we haven't applied for? Is it close enough in time that there might be security footage in a place you didn't look? Or can we re-interview someone? Those kinds of things. And see if we can make it better.
Yeah. Okay, so some tough questions just for a second. Sorry, I told you I wouldn't corner you, but these are things that people want to, know. So in, Oregon, I don't know, there's a lot that comes down from the state of Oregon that makes your job hard to prosecute. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so then, I would say that there are some people feel like, Oregon is soft on crime. That's a little broad statement. But I guess when you compare, because you said earlier, plea deals happen across every jurisdiction, everywhere. Do you think that we have more plea deals in Oregon than what other states? I mean, I don't know. Kind of give me a comparison of the state of Oregon in that manner.
Well, I don't think plea deal is the issue.
Okay.
The percentage or number of plea deals, I don't think is the issue.
Okay.
I think the issue is sentencing.
Okay.
So we might have to negotiate a case down because we know that if we go to trial, put the victim through that process, the maximum we're going to get is A, and he's offering to plead to B, and that's not that much of a difference, right? The point of those negotiations, when they're successful or when it makes sense to go to trial, is when there is a big disparity, right? Where you could get much more at trial. There's an incentive for the state because for this particular individual, we've made the assessment that person needs to be in prison. They're not safe.
Right.
They need to be punished, number one, but number two, the public needs to be protected.
Right.
There's not a lot of incentive there if, for example, you're going to get less at trial than you might get in a plea negotiation.
Of course, right.
And so I think that's the issue where Oregon struggles.
Okay, now,
And
so explain that again. So say that again. So give me an example of where Oregon struggles with sentencing.
well, if I have a situation where a victim wants this person to go to prison, right?
Right.
There might be a conversation I have to have with them to say, there is no scenario in which I can get this person to prison.
Okay.
The laws do not allow this person with this criminal history and this crime, I cannot get them to prison.
Okay.
So do you want to go to trial and he won't go to prison? Or we can negotiate it and he doesn't go to prison?
Right.
So my concern, or where I think the problem is in comparing other states or just in terms of what the challenge is that the sentencing laws aren't harsh enough.
Okay.
There needs to be more significant, I think, prison sentences, and there needs to be truth in sentencing.
Yeah.
That if somebody does go to prison, and then even if they behave well in prison, that they're not getting 30% off of their sentence and released early. Things like that make it much more difficult because those are the conversations you have in negotiations. Well, why would I accept a deal if I go to trial? This is what will happen, that kind of thing. So I don't think it's the number of plea negotiations that is the issue. I think it's, whether or not we're soft on crime is really about what we can actually get as a potential outcome.
So was Oregon different in the past, or has it always been this way?
Well, I mean, Measure 110
Okay.
changed everything.
Right. But before that, were the sentences long enough to, in your opinion, were they harsh enough before Measure 110?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. So I mean.
Well, that's the controversy too, right? Is what you do with somebody who is struggling with addiction.
Right.
Is that a medical issue or criminal issue? Well, I think we've seen from Measure 110 and the fallout of that those are not mutually exclusive boxes to put people in.
Right.
Especially since when you're talking about property crimes and other types of crimes, we've seen an explosion
Right.
of those type of offenses, and it's directly related to the huge number of increase of drug usage.
Got it. Okay.
Whereas I can't get those people into criminal court to try to force them
Okay.
to engage in some of those treatment programs that we have. And then Union County doesn't have a detox facility. We don't have respite care. We don't have inpatient treatment. So if I am looking at a case and I can't put somebody in prison because the legislature has not allowed me to do that,
Right.
what do I do with this person that's in our community?
So and Measure 110 is its own box of worms.
Oh, we could talk about that
Yeah,
for
we could,
till
yeah.
the cows come
So,
home.
but outside
I
of
talked
that,
about it before
Yeah.
it passed till the
Yeah.
cows came home.
So other crimes, I don't know, let's say robbery or other common crimes that are drunk driving, or, I mean, do you think that Oregon's sentencing are severe enough for those things?
I mean, we try to assess them on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
But I think that there should always be flexibility to deal with the person where they're at and then also to address the needs of the victim. What we've seen is that Oregon is not set up to address the defendant's needs in that. For example, we don't have the treatment, like I was mentioning, we
Right.
don't have any of those resources.
Right.
So do I think they're harsh enough? Of course not. But the back end of that, even if we put someone in prison, which is difficult to do, when they come back to our community, because they will, what do we have to offer them to make sure that they don't go back?
So they don't reoffend.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay. So,
You opened a couple can of worms there.
yes,
Brent.
no, but this is really good. You're gonna come back so we can talk about some of this stuff a little better.
Okay.
Let's talk about investigator. You mentioned that before. You
Oh, yeah.
said, yeah, and so talk about that. Is that you have an investigator that
We
you
do.
haven't had yet? And what do they do?
So we have an investigator. It's Mike Harris. He was the detective sergeant for LeGrand Police Department for years. And he is our in-house investigator. Most DA's offices have an investigator, but we haven't. We actually applied for and received a grant to fund his position. And when I keep talking about that build a case versus solve the crime, Mike is really pivotal in helping us gather that information. hey, is there an additional search warrant we can do? He's a major of the major crimes team. He assists law enforcement. It really has helped with our communication there, but also in building our cases. He can take victim statements. He's a certified police officer, so he has a gun and badge and he has arrest powers, but he primarily helps us to build those cases and act as a resource, helping with release violations. That's a huge thing that we deal with on a regular basis. Somebody assaults someone, is released because they are bailed out or the judge lets them out, and they immediately violate their release agreement, which is by consuming alcohol or by contacting their victim. Sometimes if victims have reports, they can give them to Mike. And then he really helps us in facilitating that. That's been an incredible resource. I don't know how we functioned without it.
Yeah, good.
I got a question from Bud. He would like to know, what is the conviction rate of your office?
I don't know what it is, and here's why. So I say that you should never trust a prosecutor that has 100% conviction rate. And the reason is prosecutors have the ability to dismiss cases. If you have a conviction rate that you are touting out, that means
that you
threw out the losers.
One. Yeah.
You dismissed the losers.
You are not trying the hard cases.
Right.
You are only taking to trial the cases that are slam dunks. And I don't think that's ethical.
Yeah.
I think that there are cases that need to be tried that, don't rise to the level of reasonable doubt, but there may be a question as to whether or not a conviction would be warranted. I tell all of the prosecutors that I hire and train or mentor that you should not be keeping track of your conviction rate. And if you are and touting it out, you need to look at how you're assessing your cases and whether or not you're actually taking on the challenging cases. If you wanted 100% conviction rate, you would just dismiss all of the hard cases
Right.
or plead them out. And I don't think that's appropriate, and I don't think it's ethical.
All right.
What about, okay, so tell us about your involvement with ODAA.
Oh, yeah. The Oregon District Attorneys Association is the governing nonprofit for all of the elected DAs and their deputies and staff. We primarily do legislative work. We do training, policy advice, things like that.
For like all the other district attorneys in the state?
Yes, and we have a board. I've been on the board for 5 years, and this summer I just got elected vice president.
Oh,
so I think it's an important thing because, for example, the president is Clackamas County's DA.
Right.
The vice president is Union County's DA.
Right.
You need that balance, especially when we deal with Salem so much. We need to have voices from Eastern Oregon, and I think that's really important to be involved in. I'm really involved in the legislative process through that, so that's been a rewarding experience, and I feel like I'm able to provide a unique perspective of that may work in Washington County, but it won't work here.
Right.
And they might not think of that because they're running an office with 70 attorneys and I have 3.
Right.
Right. Completely different
Right.
ball of wax.
Or they might say, oh, my citizens or my constituents feel this way. And I know that's not at all what Union County people feel like.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Well, hey, great. Thank you so much. Is there anything, before we quit, is there anything like, I really want the people of Union County to know this. They often misunderstand this, but, is there anything?
Well, there's too much to talk about there. Sentencing. I mean, I talked to Kyle about this. The main thing that I would like people to ask questions about and that I would like to explain, but it takes too long in terms of a Facebook comment or an email, if you will, is that all of the felony sentencing, is prescribed by the legislature. So there's a grid block that we use, and we find out what the person's criminal history is and what the seriousness of the crime is, and then we're bound by what that sentence is. It's not like, exactly. So when you read about, here's what the sentence was, it's not that we just made up that number or...
Some people think that.
I know. And most people
really
don't know
do.
that this grid exists. The defense attorneys have it, the judges have it, we have it. So I can tell you what the presumptive sentence is.
Right.
That's what we actually work off of, not the maximum sentence.
So the judge doesn't really, he doesn't really have the power to say, this is what I'm supposed to, this is the maximum, but you're a turd, and so I want to give you more. He doesn't have the power to do that.
In some scenarios he does, but
Okay.
most of the time, no.
Okay.
Like, he couldn't say, oh, this presumptive sentence is probation. I'm sending you to prison for 48 years. Like,
Right.
that is not allowed.
That wouldn't work out well.
And same way that I can't say that.
Right.
I mean, I could, but it would not be effective.
Right, yeah.
Or legal or ethical. But that's probably one thing that I think I struggle the most with in trying to get that message across, that there are limitations. It's not really a scapegoat thing. It's just not understanding the process or the system of how that works.
Yeah.
And I think that can be really frustrating about when our hands are tied or the judge doesn't have the power to give somebody what it is they're looking for in that.
I got one more question before you go.
Yeah.
What do you love about your job? Like, what keeps you going?
I love that, and it starts with a negative, but it ends with a positive. When somebody comes to my office, I joke it's not because they want to. It's like getting your car out of impound. Nobody is like going to the tow truck yard just to hang out and see what's up.
No.
Nobody comes to the DA's office on Wednesdays just to see what's going on. Like, hey guys, like this seems like a really cool place to hang out, right? So when people come to my office, it's because something horrible has happened to them. They're mad about something, they're hurt about something, they're not feeling safe. There's something in their life that has changed them, their trajectory of their life, or their experience, right?
Is that victim and criminal? Or like, are you speaking, when somebody comes to your office, are you speaking of victims, or are you speaking of criminals?
Victims.
Okay, victims.
And my job is to try to help them. My job collaterally is to make it a little less worse for them. I might not be able to fix it for them, but on this horrible experience, or in this horrible experience, I have the ability to make it less horrible. Okay. And I think that's a gift. And the fact that I get to be the elected DA and make decisions policy-wise, or how we approach cases, that power is something that is just inherently awesome. And I really appreciate the ability to do for the trust that has been placed in me, but also transferring that then to how I think is going to effectively help the people that have been hurt. And I love that. That's the end of the day. That's a good day for me, and I appreciate that.
Okay, so so one more little thing. So between you and Cody,
Yeah.
which one of you are the most powerful in the Union County? Because I know you guys jab each other back and forth about that.
Technically, it's me.
Technically. Okay, we'll have a
And I tell him that, and he doesn't think it's funny.
No, it'd be funny to have both of you on here at the same time sometime.
I don't know that would be appropriate.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
being here. Yeah, it's awesome, and if you're willing, we will have you back again, and we can talk about other items. I mean, I think we laid a really good foundation of what it is that you do and how district attorneys function and how crime is prosecuted and justice. So, yeah, thank you. You want to get us out of here?
Yeah, let's finish it
All
off. On this day, August 6, 1787, Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia begins debate on the first draft of the Constitution. Something very important happened on this day in 1945 BC. What was it?
45.
Something came out of the sky in Japan. It wasn't pretty.
The bomb, one of the bombs?
Hiroshima.
Hiroshima, okay.
Superfortress Enola Gay drops the atomic bomb on Hiroshima on this day, 1945. 1960, Chubby Checker performs his version of Hank Ballard's The Twist on the Dick Clark Show, which started a worldwide dance craze. That song's redone by him and the Fat Boys in like the early 90s.
That's right,
And they
yeah.
made it like a rap version of it.
Yeah.
I had the tape, I remember. 1964, Prometheus, the world's oldest tree, aged at least 4,862 years old, was accidentally cut down in Nevada. How do you accidentally cut down a 5,000-year-old tree? My goodness. 2023, on this day, Barbie, the film, passes $1 billion at the global box office. Its director, Greta Gerwig, is the first solo female filmmaker to pass 1 billion at the box office, which is pretty cool. On this day, the number one song in the country in 1974, Any Song by John Denver. And then the quote for the day, keeping with the Olympic theme, it comes from Gabby Douglas, and the hard days are the best because that's where champions are made. One more time, the hard days are the best because that's where champions are made. That's it.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Eastern Oregon. Thanks, Kelsie.
Thank you, Kelsie.
Yeah, really appreciate you being here. We'll see you guys soon.
Thursday.